A 65-year-old walks out of their final day of work carrying a genuine sense of accomplishment. A $1 million retirement portfolio, built over 4 decades of contributions, sits in their 401k. Their employer handed them a tidy exit packet on the way out, projecting a 4% annual withdrawal rate stretching for 30 years. 7 years later, that same portfolio has been cut roughly in half, not because of a stock market crash, and not because of reckless spending on luxury cruises or a second home. The money didn't disappear through a dramatic event a financial news headline would ever cover. The drawdown happened methodically, driven by expenses the original corporate exit packet omitted. These packets are often designed to fulfill a compliance obligation and limit the employer's legal liability. They rarely prepare anyone for the actual financial mechanics of aging in America. The standard retirement planning model treats savings as a solved arithmetic problem. In reality, modern retirement functions as an actuarial minefield, a gauntlet of uncapped medical liabilities, stealth tax mechanisms, and unplanned caregiving obligations. Surviving 30 years requires a tactical framework to defend against specific, verifiable shock vectors that standard retirement seminars leave out. The first major shock vector hides behind a word most working Americans assume provides comprehensive protection: Medicare. Many retirees expect this federal program to function like the private employer insurance they used during their careers. Fidelity estimates a 65-year-old will spend $172,000 on healthcare. Couples spend $345,000, excluding long-term care. Medicare charges premiums, deductibles, and 20% coinsurance with no out-of-pocket maximum. Part D adds separate costs and coverage gaps. Medicare excludes routine dental care, routine vision care, and hearing aids, needs that can individually cost several $1,000s out of pocket. The most consequential exclusion is custodial long-term care. Medicare does not cover the daily assistance with bathing, dressing, and eating that many aging Americans eventually require, regardless of financial need. According to Genworth, 69% of people turning 65 today will need some long-term care. With private nursing home rooms frequently costing over $100,000 annually, these costs come directly out of the retiree's portfolio. Blind reliance on the word Medicare creates a quantifiable black hole. It drains capital years before any tax trap or market downturn enters the picture. The second shock vector rarely appears on retirement calculators. These expenses technically belong to someone else, yet they are absorbed silently, without being formally budgeted. This is the sandwich generation phenomenon. Retirees in their 60s and 70s often find themselves managing their own finances while providing significant support to aging parents and adult children facing their own economic disruptions. Professional home health aides for an aging parent can cost several $1,000s per month. If round-the-clock care is required, the price frequently exceeds $5,000 monthly. A parallel drain comes from adult children returning home or requiring ongoing financial support well into their 30s. Parents nearing retirement often continue covering rent, insurance, or general living expenses for them. Taking on these costs diverts hundreds of thousands of dollars from the capital meant to fund the retiree's 30-year horizon. None of these obligations appear in standard 401k projections, which falsely assume the retiree's only financial obligation is to themselves. Because turning down a parent or a child in genuine need is rarely a realistic option, these unmodeled obligations represent one of the most financially consequential drains on retirement capital. Between an unyielding healthcare system and immense caregiving obligations, hundreds of thousands of dollars can vanish from a retiree's balance sheet entirely outside of any formal projection. These costs represent the flow of money out of the portfolio, but there is a second, more insidious mechanism that involves the money being pulled out to cover them. Pulling money from a portfolio to cover these shocks can trigger a cascading, multi-layered tax penalty embedded in the federal tax code and Medicare's premium structure. Emergency withdrawals can trigger a mechanism that suddenly taxes 85% of Social Security benefits assumed to be tax-free. Those inflated income figures report back to Medicare, kicking the retiree into a dramatically higher premium tier based on past income. The standard retirement model is an active trap, where the act of surviving systemic costs financially penalizes the retiree. Protecting a portfolio through these vectors requires a completely different tactical framework. begins with a set of mechanisms almost no retiree has ever heard of, despite it directly dictating how much of their own Social Security benefit they get to keep. The IRS relies on a specific calculation to determine how much of a retiree's Social Security check becomes taxable. They call it provisional income. Look at how this equation is structured. Provisional income is calculated by taking exactly half of your annual Social Security benefit and stacking it on top of your other taxable income, including the withdrawals you make from a traditional 401k or IRA. Once that combined stack crosses specific thresholds, up to 50% of your Social Security benefits become taxable. Cross a second threshold, and up to 85% becomes taxable at ordinary income rates. Because the IRS set these thresholds decades ago and never indexed them to inflation, decades of simple wage and cost of living growth force modern retirees into these higher taxation tiers. This creates a counterintuitive trap directly tied to required minimum distributions. The federal government forces retirees to take mandatory annual withdrawals from traditional 401k accounts starting at age 73. Whether you need the cash that year or not, that forced withdrawal artificially inflates your provisional income calculation, pushing a massive share of your Social Security into taxable territory. And the tax code isn't the only mechanism watching that artificially inflated income figure. Medicare uses it too. This timeline charts Medicare's income-related monthly adjustment amount, commonly known as IRMA. It dictates your Medicare Part B and Part D premium tiers based on a 2-year look-back window. Your premiums today are based on the income you reported 2 years prior. Cross specific income thresholds, and Part B premiums alone climb to several times the standard base rate. A single isolated event in year 1, a large RMD, a Roth conversion, or the sale of an investment property, triggers a cascading math equation that multiplies your healthcare costs. Because of that 2-year delay, a retiree is hit with a massive premium surcharge long after their income has dropped back down to normal levels. The financial penalty arrives completely disconnected from their current financial reality. Layer these two mechanisms together. A single mandatory 401k withdrawal simultaneously increases your federal tax bill and multiplies your Medicare premiums in the exact same year. It is a compounding, synchronized penalty for having successfully saved. Beyond government taxation, there is a purely mathematical risk hiding inside portfolio mechanics. It has nothing to do with long-term average returns. It is dictated entirely by the specific, unpredictable order in which market returns actually arrive. This split-screen graph maps sequence of returns risk. We are looking at two exactly identical starting balances. Both hypothetical retirees withdraw the same amount, and over 30 years, both portfolios experience the exact same average annual return. Yet they end up with wildly different outcomes, based solely on whether the poor-performing years arrived early or late. A retiree who experiences a significant market downturn in their first few years of retirement, while continuously withdrawing fixed living expenses, is forced to sell a much larger volume of shares at depressed prices. This permanently reduces the number of shares left in the account to participate in the market's eventual recovery. The retiree on the right experiences that identical market downturn a decade later. Years of prior growth built a larger cushion, allowing them to weather the exact same market event with dramatically less damage to their long-term survival.
Actuarial researchers modeling this dynamic consistently find that a poor sequence of returns in the first 5 to 10 years of retirement represents one of the single largest determinants of portfolio depletion. Compounding this mathematical risk is a modern demographic reality that traditional institutions never built their models to handle. Retirement age has trended earlier for a large share of Americans, frequently through involuntary job loss in their late 50s or early 60s. At the same time, life expectancy for someone who reaches age 65 continues to stretch further than historical averages. A 60-year-old today is potentially funding a 30 to 40-year timeline. That actuarial horizon is considerably longer than the standard 4% rule was ever stress-tested against when it was populated using historical data from shorter retirements. Combine a 40-year funding horizon with the possibility of a poor early sequence of returns. A portfolio that appears mathematically sufficient on a static spreadsheet faces a highly probable risk of running out of money well before the retiree's life expectancy runs out. We have documented the shock vectors, a compounding tax trap, Medicare premium surges, and sequence risk. A tactical defense requires specific multi-account coordination.
This flowchart maps the first countermeasure, maximizing a health savings account. An HSA offers a triple tax advantage. Contributions reduce taxable income, balances grow tax-deferred, and withdrawals for medical expenses come out tax-free. Crucially, an HSA carries no required minimum distributions, safely bypassing both the provisional income calculation and IRMA premium triggers. The second countermeasure defends directly against sequence risk. Maintaining 1 to 3 years of anticipated living expenses in a cash buffer allows a retiree to draw from stable reserves during an early market downturn. The equity portion of the portfolio is given time to recover before those depressed shares ever need to be sold. The final countermeasures require abandoning fixed withdrawal percentages for dynamic guardrails, adjusting annual withdrawals based on actual portfolio performance. This is paired with proactive asset location, strategically deciding whether to draw from a taxable, tax-deferred, or tax-free Roth account in any given year to stay under IRS and Medicare thresholds. None of these tools eliminate the underlying risks on their own, but deployed together, they form a coordinated plan built to withstand the actual financial mechanics of modern retirement. The silent retirement trap comes down to 6 documented mechanisms: uncapped healthcare exposure, unplanned caregiving, provisional income taxation, IRMA surcharges, sequence risk, and longevity horizons. These vectors do not appear meaningfully in standard corporate retirement seminars because those seminars are built to satisfy an HR compliance checkbox, not to prepare an employee for the real mechanics of aging in America. We want to hear your specific experiences in the comments. What was the single most unexpected expense you or a retired family member were forced to absorb after leaving the workforce, the one that never showed up on any calculator? Second, if anything in this documentary felt rushed or if the arithmetic skipped a step, tell us. We use direct feedback from careful viewers to make every deep dive sharper and more precise. Hit like if this breakdown clarified your own retirement math. Subscribe for more weekly investigations into hidden financial mechanics, and we will see you in the next video.